High in the mountains, half an hour's drive from the Spanish capital, Madrid, is a massive monument. The giant cross marks the burial place of the dictator, General Francisco Franco. In 1936, Franco led a military uprising against the left-wing Republican government. His nationalist forces won the civil war that followed, and he ruled the country for almost 40 years in a military dictatorship. I used to live in Spain, and this place underlined for me just how Spain's military past still haunts the present. Inside the rock, underneath the cross, is a vast cathedral. Behind the altar is Franco's grave. There are always fresh flowers here. Drive to the other side of Madrid and you'll find a very different kind of memorial. The 16th century monastery of Uclés was a place of sanctuary for Republicans during the Civil War. But after Franco's victory, it became a prison for his opponents and a killing ground.
The first man we exhumed here, he was tortured to death. Starvation, cold, torture, that can give you quite a picture of it, you know. Andrés Iniesta, who was the youngest prisoner, is a man who's about 1.63 meters tall. When he left this prison in 1943, he weighed 32 kilos when he was transferred to the Ocana Prison. I think this can give you a pretty good example of what happened here, and, well, the comparisons are obvious, and everybody remembers the Jews living in the concentration camps.
Now this place is a mass grave, one of many across Spain. Maximo Molina has his own reasons for being interested. His grandfather was a victim of Franco's nationalists.
We'll actually have a picture here of my grandfather Francisco. And it's like his ghost has been on my back all my life. Some people told me he was an anarchist, some people told me he was a communist, and at the end, you knew nothing.
Since Franco died more than 30 years ago, there's been a nationwide pact of silence, preventing discussion about abuses that happened on both sides of the conflict. But this pact has left a vast section of Spanish society feeling isolated.
These people have got monuments. They're just nearby. You find memorials on the side of the road all over the area. These people have places to mourn. There is no balance between what these people have suffered. There are people who have come here and have thrown the mother's ashes over the wall so that the mother could rest here, mix in the weed with the father's bones that nobody knew where they were. It's quite impossible to compare. They've been receiving money and help for decades, while the rest of us have got nothing.
The divisions and distrust that remain in Spanish society were exposed earlier this year when the head of the Spanish army, Lieutenant General José Mena Aguado, gave a speech suggesting the armed forces might once again take a hand in politics. The Mena speech centred on a demand by Catalonia, a region in the northeast of the country, for greater autonomy from Madrid and the status of a nation within Spain. Catalans took to the streets of their capital, Barcelona, in support of the plans, but most other Spaniards were opposed to the idea of this wealthy region breaking away. And General Mena said the army was constitutionally bound to defend the unity of Spain and would be forced to step in if the government bowed to Catalonia's demands. He'd raised the spectre of a military coup. The country was shocked and he was sacked.
Pues como decíamos antes, Isobel
General Mena's speech took everyone in Spain by surprise. It was tough and attention-grabbing. People in Spain aren't used to hearing a general talk like that. But Spanish people aren't used to hearing about a region breaking away either, and Catalonia changing its statute. If things are done by the rules, constitutionally, speeches like this won't be necessary. All General Mena did was to consider what might have to happen if things are not done the right way.
Colonel José Conde is from a staunchly military family. His father and his uncles fought for Franco during the Civil War. He was a cavalry officer for over 30 years, and 2 of his sons are soldiers. These days, the colonel runs the conservative Spanish Military Association. Now he's campaigning to defend the honour of General Mena, who is also a personal friend.
Es un hombre muy cordial.
He's a good man. He has practically no faults. He's had a brilliant career and his record is spotless. Every single task he's been given, he has performed perfectly adequately.
But do you think it's right that a general should be able to speak about this kind of very political matter?
It's totally and fully correct. It's one thing for a general not to talk about political issues and a different thing for him not to talk about what is happening in Spain nowadays. The Statute of Catalonia is a problem in all our hearts. I honestly believe, from the bottom of my heart, that the majority is with General Mena and with me.
You might expect a man of Conde's generation to feel that way. But what of younger soldiers?
I'm 20 years old and I live in Madrid. I spend my spare time training in the gym or in here playing pool.
I've come to this pool hall off Madrid's Gran Via to meet a young off-duty soldier. He doesn't want to give his name or show his face, but he's agreed to talk to me about how soldiers of his generation feel about the government's treatment of their boss. Does he think the majority in the army support General Mena?
Every soldier supports General Mena.
Everybody?
Everybody. Because it's totally irrational that they should start trying to divide the nation itself.
Do you understand why some people felt threatened by what General Mena said?
I don't understand it. Because what we in the army do is defend the nation's unity, nothing else.
But not everyone in Spain feels that trust in the military. Volunteer archaeologists are exhuming victims of the previous military involvement in politics every day here at the mass graves in Uclés.
My reaction, first shock, because one didn't expect it, you know, a little bit scared. If you look at the Spanish history, the military have done nothing for Spanish democracy, nothing but reacting violently. With this background, one worries a little.
The bodies that are being exhumed here are from the period of military repression that followed the Civil War. Across Spain, the numbers of victims being found in unmarked graves is climbing towards 200,000.
Tenemos varios ejemplos cerca donde estás tú, pasado ese muro.
Just beyond that wall, we found 2 graves.
Encontramos 2 fosas, 2 tumbas.
One with 2 bodies in it and one with 4.
Individuos en una, 4 en otra, con evidencias de haber sido.
There was evidence that they'd all been shot with a kind of coup de grace.
Y luego ya un disparo a la cabeza.
All shot in the head.
Aquí tiro de gracia.
We even found the bullets in the graves.
Y era bastante evidente porque suele aparecer incluso la bala.
This dig is organised by the Non-Governmental Association for Restoring Historical Memory, an organisation committed to identifying victims of political violence and forcing Spain to confront the facts of what the military dictatorship did. Maximo has a particular interest in what is being found. His grandfather and great-grandfather were both shot by nationalist forces. His family had been supporters of the Republican government that was overthrown by Franco's coup.
He was basically killed because of his union action. On March 1936, the Republic gave him some land that they collectivized. And actually, my grandfather was the sort of manager of this collectivity. There were 60 people in this collectivity in June 1936. In November, there were 14. The rest had been killed or had escaped. I visited the place where he was shot dead. I visited the cemetery where he was buried. There was something terrible. They call it the meat lorry, they call it. And it's as they kill them at the crossroads or on the sides of the roads, they very often would let the corpses expose for days. So giving an example to terrorize people, you know. And then, as I got to know, my grandfather was picked up by this meat lorry and taken to the nearest cemetery and buried there together with hundreds of comrades.
That was 70 years ago, but the fear remains. There are real concerns about the implications of people like Massimo and the volunteers disturbing the Pact of Silence.
We started with this association on the 7th of July 2004. It was a Wednesday. And on Sunday, my mother called me, telling me to be very careful with the things I did. If I told you how many times I've been told that you're going to end up like your grandfather.
Now, with the socialist government beginning to break the 30-year Pact of Silence about the abuses, in part 2, I'll be asking what will be the impact on modern-day Spain. The scale and pace of change in Spain since General Franco's death in 1975 have been impressive. This is a thriving democracy at the political heart of Europe. The current socialist government is certainly keen to remove all traces of the days when the military were in charge. There used to be a statue of General Franco on horseback on this plinth outside the Ministry for the Environment, but it's been taken down. And they're starting to address the Pact of Silence. But some here say it's thanks to the Pact of Silence that Spain has grown so quickly from a country riven by civil war and dictatorship into a modern liberal democracy.
I don't understand it. Because if our transition to democracy was successful and an example to other countries in the same situation, it was because the army knew what its mission was.
Colonel José Conde's house is a shrine to his conservative Catholic life and traditional Spanish values. He says that the way people are now viewing the period of military power disregards the realities of the past, and that people are wrong to disparage the military in the way they do.
Time passes. Spain came out of a civil war. We all know how it happened, we know who won and how he stayed in power. I won't say anything about this, but here was a nation that followed him. There weren't huge revolts, there were no political parties, not because they were banned, but because they didn't exist. The military did a lot of useful things in power.
And Colonel Conde's not alone. At General Franco's vast mausoleum outside Madrid, elderly Spaniards still come to hear Mass and pay their respects to the military dictator. And here, at the foundation set up in Franco's honour, they're happy to show me the mementos of their hero, lovingly displayed in the foyer. Under the previous Conservative government, the foundation got a public grant for its work, preserving, as they see it, a true record of the General's life and times. But of course, they make no mention of the mass graves.
Well, you see, these tombs are a consequence of the Civil War.
Es después de la guerra. This was after the war.
There's an explanation for the repression after the war. The Civil War produced a series of acts. Let's call them acts of vandalism, on both sides, because that's what civil war is like. But in the Republican Red Zone, tremendous atrocities were committed. In Spain, we've reached a point where we do not want to dig up the past.
I believe you must be a real evil person, an ill-will one, to defend that in a society, in a Western European democracy like ours nowadays, it is right to have a country crowded with people that are buried in the country, buried on the roadsides, or buried in real pitiful places like the one we are at the moment. We have a country that is full of mass graves. How do we want or intend to ignore this? It's pretty difficult, isn't it?
but ignored it has been for 70 years. I asked some of the student volunteers working at the graves if they were taught anything about this period in school.
At school we weren't taught anything about it, but later, in college, we were told a bit more. But I found out much more by myself than I was ever taught about it.
Ignorar no. Suavizar.
But it was like they weren't exactly covering it up, but smoothing it over in the name of so-called objectivity.
Ha sido falsa porque lo que ha conseguido es relativizar los hechos.
So in the end they just succeeded in covering up the real story of the dictatorship.
Se hizo un silencio obligatorio, y no se repararon los daños de todo el periodo de la dictadura.
The volunteers are careful to preserve all the evidence they can. More than just returning the bodies of loved ones to their relatives, they want to be able to tell the true story of how these people died.
Unless we get these people back to the society they were grabbed and taken violently from, these people are not going to rest. They are restless. This is what silence has brought. A lot of people restless. Sometimes one gets the impression as if they had been waiting for everybody to die. And then the problem would solve because there would be no one who could give an account of what happened.
In Uclés, the old people do still remember what happened. This beautiful little village lived through a time of fear and threats. Many here know of people who disappeared. One man told me he remembers seeing a woman burnt to death in this very square. Like all those who work for the association, Maximo is a volunteer. In his everyday life, he runs this language academy. He's trying to record as many testimonies as he can before the old people die, along with their memories. Today, Valeriano Fernandez is describing how his father was shot here in Uclés, and two of his uncles were shot in Madrid. He tells Maximo how, after his father was killed, the entire family were terrorized.
They arrived at midnight, broke into the house. They were looking for my uncle. He was the mayor, saying, if your uncle doesn't turn up, then you'll all be killed. So of course we were scared. They pulled the blankets off the beds night after night, looking to see who was sleeping there, searching for my uncle.
Since then, Valeriano's mother has had nowhere to go to mourn her husband. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened to him.
¿Qué siento? Escalofríos. Siento escalofríos.
Now I feel a tingle down my spine.
Un día me dijeran, ¿este es tu padre?
I feel tense and nervous when I think about them finding my father's remains and saying, this is him, this is your father. But I hold out hope that it happens. I have hope.
The wounds are open. You know, they say that we are reopening wounds, which is not true. The wounds are open themselves. And when a wound is open, it can get infected. And when it gets infected, it can give you major health problems. That's the health problem Spanish society has with this, you know. And what we try to do is clean the wounds by speaking about it, by letting fresh air to come in them, and hopefully closing the wounds forever.
But despite appearances, the past may not be another country. With the prospect of other regions following Catalonia's lead to autonomy, Colonel José Conde still doesn't rule out the possibility of the army intervening to stop what they perceive as a threat to Spain, just as it did in the past.
Let's imagine that things get worse and a part of our beloved land declares independence, and the soldiers are ordered to respect this situation. Then watch out. because at that point, something very serious could happen. I'm not saying that it is going to happen, but it could.